Hello students, welcome to another session of physics. Today we are going to learn another topic from the unit of rectilinear propagation of light, pinhole camera and shadows. Under this unit we are going to learn what is an eclipse. This unit falls under the theme of light. Now students, till now we had learnt various concepts of light, that whether it travels in a straight line, what is light, how shadows are formed. Now we are going to know what do we mean by eclipse. Now students, we know that we live in the solar system, right? In the solar system, all the planets revolve around the sun, right? All the planets, including the Earth. So, if I can say that Earth revolves around the sun, will I be wrong? The answer will be no, ma'am, you are right. The Earth revolves around the sun. What else revolves around the sun? Apart from all the planets, we have some satellites. So, moon is our natural satellite. And as Earth goes around the sun, the moon goes around the Earth. So, in the Earth, sun and the moon system, what do we see? We see that the Earth goes around the sun, right? And the moon goes around the Earth. Right? So, it's a system in which one body is revolving around another body. But there is a very peculiar difference. When we talk about the sun, the earth and the moon system, they do not lie on the same plane. That means that on the plane where the sun and the earth revolves, the plane from which the moon revolves around the earth is different from the plane of the earth and the sun. Okay. Now, some days it happens that the three bodies we talking about, that is the sun, the earth and the moon, they align. What do we mean by align, students? Getting in one line. So, some days we observe, even though the earth, sun and the moon do not lie in the same plane, but some days they come in a single line. On such days, we see a very peculiar effect or phenomena in nature and we call it the eclipse. Now, during the course of revolution, sometimes the earth, the sun and the moon happen to be in the same line, right? Thus, two things can happen. Either the earth can come between the sun and the moon, right? This is in between, right, students? Or one more thing can happen, when they come in line, the moon apart from this position can be at this position. And in this case, the moon becomes in between the earth and the sun. So, when the three bodies align, that means the three bodies come in one line, either the shadow of the earth falls on the moon, that is in this case, or the shadow of the moon falls on the earth, that is in this case. Right, students? So, we have two cases, either the earth can come between the sun and the moon, or the moon can come between the earth and the sun, right? Now, what happens when this occurs? When this occurs, we get an eclipse. So, an eclipse is defined as the shadows cast by heavenly bodies. When we talk about all these bodies that are heavenly, such as the sun, the earth, the moon, we call them heavenly bodies. The shadow cast by heavenly bodies on each other is called as eclipse. Now, we consider two conditions. Either the earth can come in between, right? Or the moon can come in between, right? So depending on these two conditions, there are two kinds of eclipses. Number one, solar eclipse, and number two is the lunar eclipse. Now, when and how things happen? What is lunar eclipse, students? If the shadow of the earth falls on the moon, that means the earth comes between the sun and the moon, we get what, students? We get a lunar eclipse. On the other hand, if the moon come between the earth and the sun, what do you get, students? You get a solar eclipse. So let me just read it. If the shadow of the earth falls on the moon, then we have lunar eclipse. On the other hand, if the shadow of the moon falls on the earth, then the sun is not visible. That is, we have solar eclipse. Okay, students? How does lunar eclipse are caused? This unit falls under the theme of light. Now, students, before we start with this topic, let's just have a recap what we have already learned. We know that, students, the sun, the earth and the moon system, they do not lie in the same plane, right? But occasionally it happens that they align. That means they come in a straight line. When this happens, either the shadow of the earth can fall on the moon or the shadow of the moon falls on some part of the earth. Due to this, we see a phenomena we call as eclipse. So for definition, we can say the shadow cast by the heavenly bodies on each other is called eclipse. We learned that there are two kinds of eclipse. Number one, solar eclipse, and number two is the lunar eclipse. In this class, we are going to learn how is the lunar eclipse caused. Now, before we reach to that, let's have a picture how these heavenly bodies are aligned. Let's say I have my sun, my earth and the moon system as shown here. On some occasional event, these three bodies align. That means they come in a straight line. Right, students? So when they come in a straight line, either the moon can be in between the sun and the earth, or as shown here, the earth can come in between the sun and the moon. So in this case, the shadow of the earth will be casted on the moon, right? Because out of these three bodies, only one body is luminous and that is sun, right? So when the earth comes in between the sun and the moon, it hinders the light falling on the moon, that thus forming a shadow. So if the shadow of the earth falls on the moon, then which kind of eclipse we talk about? We talk about lunar eclipse, right? Now let's look at how lunar eclipse occurs. Let's say we have a diagram here. In this diagram, we have sun, earth and moon as shown. We know that light travels in straight line, right? And the moon is illuminated only because it reflects the light from the sun, right? It does not have its own light, it reflects the light from the sun. Now, say it is moving in such a pattern that it is entering the darker region where the shadow of the earth is falling. When the moon will enter in that region and falls in the straight line of the earth-sun system, then the earth will block the light falling on the moon. And in that case, we will see a lunar eclipse. So let me just read it. Lunar eclipse is always caused on a full moon night. Now you always remember this, student, this is a very important fact, that lunar eclipse only occurs on a full moon night, right? During the course of revolution, the sun, the earth and the moon happen to be in the straight line as shown in the figure. in the same plane such that the earth is in between the sun and the moon, as we can see here. If I say this is S, this is E, this is M, then E is in between the S and M system, right? Thus, for some time, the light of the sun does not fall on the moon. As we can see here, this is the darker region of the shadow. As the moon has no lights of its own, it is not visible, and hence what kind of eclipse we get, students? The lunar eclipse, right? Now, in the lunar eclipse, students, you can observe that the sunlight is blocked over this darker region. That means no light is falling, not at all. But there is another region where partial light is coming. Thus, when the moon comes in this region, we get a partial eclipse. But as it comes in this region, the darkest region, we get a total lunar eclipse. Total lunar eclipse are more common, as we know. Why, students? Because the earth is very big in size as compared to the moon. So let's read it here. The lunar eclipse is generally total. That is, the moon completely disappears in the shadow of the earth. Now, how is it possible, students? Let's go back to the previous image. As we know that earth is very, very large as compared to the moon. So, when moon falls under the shadow of the earth, it is more commonly seen that the earth can cover completely the whole moon for a longer period of time. That means it is because the earth is fairly big body and its shadow can completely cover the whole moon. It is for the same reason that lunar eclipse lasts for 2 to 3 hours. That means we can know that total lunar eclipse is the most common phenomena we see, and it can last up to 2 to 3 hours through a very large shadow of the earth. It is because of this reason that lunar eclipse is a common phenomena over the year. At least once in a year, the shadow of the earth falls on the moon, causing what, students? Lunar eclipse. Right, students? What is solar eclipse and how it is caused? Now, before going to this topic, we will revise what we had already done. Till now, you have learnt various properties of light, what is light, how shadows are formed, how light transfers from one point to another, and so on. Now, we are going to understand how does a solar eclipse is caused. You know, students, that in the earth, sun and the moon system, the plane is different for the earth, sun and the earth moon system. That's why these objects do not line up on daily basis. But occasionally, sometimes these three bodies fall under one line. And when this happens, the shadow of one body may fall on the another. When this happens, we call that eclipse is happening. So, if we have to define eclipse, eclipse is the shadow cast by the heavenly bodies on each other is defined as eclipse. Now, we have already learned that there are two types of eclipse. Number one, solar eclipse, and number two, lunar eclipse. You had already learned that what is a lunar eclipse and how it is caused. Now we are going to concentrate on solar eclipse. So let's begin with the solar eclipse. Now students, when the earth, the sun and the moon align, we see an eclipse. But there are two conditions when they can align and one body can hinder the light for the other. In number one case, the earth can be in the center of the moon and the sun. When this happens, we see a lunar eclipse, right, students? And the other case is that the moon comes in between the earth and the sun. When this happens, students, we see a solar eclipse. Now, why we see a solar eclipse? Because in this case, the moon hinders the light coming from the sun that falls on the earth. So, if I read the definition, if the shadow of the moon falls on the earth, then the sun is not visible for some time, and we say solar eclipse is taking place. Now let's understand how solar eclipse is taking place. Let's say in the diagram we have our sun, our moon and the earth in the arrangement as shown. So you can see that the moon is in between the sun and the earth, right? Now what you have learned till now? That light travels in straight line. So light coming from the sun when hindered from the moon causes solar eclipse. And which day solar eclipse should occur, students? It occurs on a new moon day. That means when there is no moon in the sky, the moon is towards the daytime of the earth. That's why we call it a new moon. And when the sunlight falls on this new moon, it gets hindered, right? So, the day when moon is not visible on the night side of the earth, it is the new moon, and on such day only we can observe a solar eclipse. During the course of revolution, the sun, the moon and the earth happen to be in the straight line in the same plane such that the moon is in the middle, right? At this time, the shadow of the moon falls on the earth. Thus, for some time, a part of the earth does not receive the sunlight. That means it becomes completely dark even in the daytime. And this is the time we call as the solar eclipse. Now, as in the moon shadow, the darkest portion is this grey area. But apart from this darkest portion, there is some partial shadow of the moon around the darker area. So, at the moment of total solar eclipse, the shadow, the darkest shadow is falling on the earth. This takes place at some particular places. However, if some amount of the light happens to reach the earth, then a part of the sun appears in the sky, and this is known as partial solar eclipse. So, in the darker region, students, you see the total solar eclipse, right? And in the region where you can see some part of the sun, you see partial solar eclipse. There is one more kind of eclipse that we see in the phenomena of solar eclipse, and that is called annular solar eclipse. Now students, it may happen that because of the positioning of the moon, the shadow is not directly on the earth but falls just beyond the earth. In this case, the moon cannot hide the complete sun but forms a ring of it. So this time when you see a ring of the sun in the sky, you call it annular solar eclipse. So if I read it for you students, it says an annular solar eclipse occurs when the tip of the umbra falls on the earth. In such a situation, for the people living in that region, the view of the sun is not completely blocked, but it shows an outer rim of the sun. This outer rim of the sun is called corona, and it is at this time that you see a very bright ring that we call as the diamond ring in the sky. Okay, students, let's move and come to the spotlight or the fun fact related to our solar eclipse. Now students, it has been found that the solar eclipse hardly lasts for 5-10 minutes. You had learnt already that in lunar eclipse, the lunar eclipse can last for 2 to 3 hours. But when we talk about solar eclipse, it cannot last more than 5 minutes. Now, why this happens, students? As we know, moon is a very small body as compared to the sun. It cannot hide completely the sun for a very long time. Thus, the earth, while revolving around the sun, soon passes out of the shadow region of the moon, causing to last the solar eclipse for a very small time. It is for the same reason that the solar eclipse is generally partial, because the small size of the moon cannot cover the complete sun. We cannot have total solar eclipse as a very common phenomena. It is also fairly uncommon phenomena because many a time the shadow of the moon even cannot reach the earth. Right, students? Lastly, we will only understand whether we should see the solar eclipse occurring or not. The answer will be strictly no. Whenever there is a solar eclipse, it is not as advisable to look at it with your naked eyes. Why so, students? Because at that time the ultraviolet radiations are at peak and it can harm the retina of the eye, causing a loss in the eyesight, which we definitely don't want, right? So even if you want to observe the miraculous phenomena of solar eclipse, it is advised not to do it with the naked eyes. If you still want to see it, you can use a plain glass and handle it over a candle flame so that a lot of soot gets formed over it. By doing this, you can almost cut most of the radiation coming out of the sun and then you can observe it. Never try to observe the solar eclipse using a dark glass because it cannot protect your eyes from the harmful radiation. Okay, students? Thank you.